Welcome to the October 17th, 2022 meeting of the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. I'm Dave Hansen. This meeting is being recorded and will be available after its conclusion via link on the Commission's website. Commissioners, please make sure that your microphone light is on prior to speaking, making a motion, or voting. Chase, please take a roll call of the Commissioners.
Commissioner Smith
Go Vols.
is present. Commissioner Woodson
Go Vols.
is present. And Chairman Hansen
Go Vols.
is present.
Thanks, Dave.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
The Business Operation Committee will consider two items on the agenda today. First, we will hear the Executive Director's operational update. Next, the Commission's Director of Finance and Operations, Melanie Harrell, will discuss fiscal year 2022 closeout, the fiscal year 2023 budget to actuals, as well as fiscal year 2024 budget request. Do we have any questions or comments on the agenda before we vote to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
The motion is approved.
The minutes of the meeting held on July 27th, 2022 have been provided. Does anyone have any comments or edits to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed? Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the July 27th, 2022 meeting?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion carries.
We're settled now. We're settled. I know usually we're closer, so.
First item on our agenda is an operations update from our wonderful Executive Director, Tess Stovall. Tess, you are recognized.
Thank you. This is Tess Stovall, Executive Director of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission, and I'm excited to provide you a brief update on operational things that have happened over the last quarter. So first, I did want to flag two procurement-related activities the staff has been engaged in. The first is beginning work for a FY24 contract with Elevation. This is the platform that we use to house all of our individualized learning plans. So this is a contract that we know takes a lot of time to get through all of the approval processes within the state for contracts. And so we have begun now to work with Central Procurement and Elevation to ensure that our schools are able to access this platform beginning in FY24 or continue, that we don't have any disruptions in services. Secondly, the staff is beginning to look at some short-term contracts to add some needed capacity around two particular areas of our district functions. The first is around some professional development and technical support around students with foster care and students experiencing homelessness. When we have both done our site visits and our annual monitoring of schools, as well as when the department has done their monitoring of us, these are two areas that we have identified as areas for growth with our schools, both for their technical support as well as their knowledge in working with these two special populations. So we are working on a short-term contract to provide some additional capacity in that area. And then secondly, as Melanie and Kelly talked earlier, we have a lot around our fiscal supports that are required when it comes to all of the grants that we as a district have, as schools have, both on the reviewing of their reimbursements, budgets. This is both a capacity need as it relates to the programmatic side. So are you using the funds correctly and with the correct programs, and also the accounting side? And so we are looking to add some short-term support in this area to ensure that we're able just to get reimbursements done correctly, quickly, and that our schools can get the money as soon as possible. And I think this is a preview for for Melanie's presentation when we think about our FY24 budget request, that we're looking that potentially as we grow and our portfolio grows, the need to have additional staff capacity in these areas. Next is the office space update. I have been told we are moving at the end of January. Now, am I packing my bag just yet? No, but we have had a move meeting and things are on track. So we're really excited about that. We appreciate the Department of General Services keeping us up to date, but things are moving along in that front. And then finally, I did want to make a note, and I'm glad the full commission is here as we think about meeting locations for the next calendar year. The Department of General Services is undergoing a I guess, city-wide upgrade in technology shifting as it relates to committee meeting space. And what that means is some of the usual rooms that we have used in the past are not going to be available for us in a short-term period as technology is upgraded, ownership is upgraded, et cetera. So we will be looking to, and Drejan's task as of Wednesday morning is to identify where our meetings are going to be physically, particularly for our January and our April meeting, because we acknowledge that the General Assembly, which has graciously allowed us to use these rooms, will be in session. Our Davy Crockett rooms that we have used in the past will be going through technology upgrades. As well as the Tennessee Tower rooms, which we have used in the past, are also going through technology upgrades. So what that means is that we may be looking at increased temporary costs to host meetings, both in terms of the rental of the space and the live stream. And also thinking about where else are there opportunities for us to host a meeting that allows both for you all to participate, the public to participate, and for us to get live stream. So I just wanted to put that out there as challenges that the staff is working through as it relates to our meeting locations. One of the pieces of feedback that we got when we were told that we couldn't access the Tennessee Tower space was, well, you all should just look to meet virtually. We cannot do that in accordance with state law. So we will be being flexible and figuring out where that will be. So more to come there. And with that, those are my updates, and I am happy to take any questions from the committee.
Are there any questions for Tess before we move to our next item? Sorry, Mr. Chair, and then Eddie? Go first there. Eddie?
Nope, I want to defer to the chair.
I don't know if that's a good sign or not, but we'll see. But thank you. Quick question, and thank you, Mr. Chair. When we had the report about looking at security in our schools and how we're doing now, have you looked at it all? Do you think we're going to get to a point as we keep adding new schools that we're going to need somebody who has a specific security-related background or role? Or I was just, it was interesting when Melanie went through it,
Yeah.
which I appreciated, but I probably at some point, if this gets more complicated, which it will,
Right.
and there's more accountability coming, which there will be, and we add more schools, is this something you're looking at as a possible, at least a part of somebody's role going forward?
Absolutely. So I do want to note that this is a part of someone's responsibility currently to manage the emergency operations plans, ensure both the district is compliant, schools are compliant. I do think this is an area when we think about, is there a need for a short-term contract, and or do we have staff individuals who are more, what I would say, experts in this area? Absolutely, particularly as our portfolio grows. I will say that next week, some of the team is going to the National Association of Charter School Authorizers Conference. And in previous conferences, school security and the role of authorizers for charter schools has been a topic. And so I anticipate it will continue to be a topic of both how do we serve as an authorizer in that role, but also supporting school autonomy. I think one of the things that is important for you all to know is, as a part of the pre-opening process for any school that's opening, we do have some sight lines on how are they preparing for their role as it relates to school security, how are they connecting with local law enforcement. So absolutely, this is something that we continue to think about around staff capacity and what does that look like moving forward.
Commissioner Smith?
The only suggestion I was going to make is if the commission wanted to consider moving the January meeting around the 12th or 13th on that Saturday. Tennessee does take on Kentucky in basketball, so that is an option for the eastern part of the state. And I'm sure we could find you a room between the University of Tennessee and all of their technology for being able to do live stream.
And this is after just winning the Alabama game. I mean,
And I will say,
how bad does this get if y'all win the SEC?
when I was on the state board,
no
Tess and I,
idea.
you were still there too. We had a meeting at UT Knoxville and got to tour the football locker
Yes.
room. So there's that.
I'd like to limit comments and questions to people who are on our committee, please. Thank you, Tess. These updates are very beneficial for us as commissioners. Thank you very much.
Well, I actually do have a more serious comment
yes.
related to all of that. I know at one point we talked about moving the meetings across, the different areas of the state. I wonder if, and this is, I'm not sure how plausible this is, what might it look like to have meetings at some of the schools who we authorize, and having that as a public setting?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think the biggest challenge we face is the requirement we have for live streaming. And if wherever site that is able to do that, and I think when we think about a pure cost perspective, and I want to harken back to my time with the state board, when we had out-of-town meetings, which are great, and I want to say I fully support us thinking about that, we have to think about the infrastructure, and does the places that we host them have the infrastructure? If they don't, do we have the infrastructure to run a live stream? And so I really think that is the biggest challenge. When we did some preliminary outreach to some different universities outside of Nashville, when we were originally thinking moving, hosting meetings outside, it was going to be a significant amount of money for us to host it and do the live stream. I'm not saying that that's something that we wouldn't want to consider in terms of our overall budget, but I think that is something that we need to know going into this process, what we will be taking on with regard to moving a meeting location-wise.
We have a comment from Chairperson Griscom, and then
Thank you. Let me just remind commissioners, when we first were setting up, we talked about having two of our meetings at a school, if we could, or at least in a city where there are charter schools. And because of COVID and the fact that we were trying to figure all this out, we made a conscious decision that for this period of time, we need to stay here. We need to get ourselves together. I think what we've seen over the last several months was time well spent. I think people have seen that this commission learned a lot and can operate and make good decisions based on the facts. But we've had preliminary conversations about, now that it looks like COVID is in the rear view, let's hope, that maybe we go back to where we were going to have two in Nashville and two out of Nashville. So, Commissioner Sisson, I wanted to share that because we have had that conversation, but made a decision based on COVID to sort of revise it. But yes, I do hope that we get back to a point where we are able, to go and physically be in cities, be in schools, because it's always been, I said to Tess when I first came on from TBR, that was always a real benefit where TBR held meetings at either a community college or in some case a TCAT, because you really could see that community firsthand in addition to the institute. So I just thank for letting me just add that in. Thank you.
Well, I think since the chair's made that comment, mine is sort of unnecessary, but I will personally volunteer to do whatever I can do to leverage our partnerships to make sure that we can get off campus and onto the campuses that we have an important responsibility to know and understand. I think it will make us a better commission. I know that the decision to go off-site from Nashville was one that preceded me, and now that we do have a new normal, even if it's a more flexible normal, this is absolutely something that we can do. If I can, as a member of your committee, Mr. Chairman, be a volunteer to make sure that our partners in higher education I think that they would be honored to host us in different parts of the state, and it would put us in an additional opportunity to visit the schools that we have important responsibilities to serve, and I just think that'll make us better. So I want to double down on that. And if that's not, we've got a lot going on. I will have to say, I know that this 2 days, this last month, what we've asked of the team on the commission of staff is significant. And those are really important responsibilities. So I just want to put a thumb on the scale for prioritizing this in a world where you all have a lot of important priorities to do the work that we've asked you to do. And if there are logistical supports that you all might need, because actually it's a lot to move this meeting off campus. I've served on several commissions that do float. It's a real added set of responsibilities for the team. I've got lots of experience with that, and so if that's something that this board needs to ask and answer to support the staff and team with logistical supports, I would be an advocate for that as well.
Thank you for that. I will absolutely, we will take you up on that. I think the chair and I will come together in terms of looking at calendar year 24 meetings in terms of location. It would be my recommendation that we keep our meetings in January and late March, early April here in Nashville. Number one, from a logistical point of view, but also knowing that the General Assembly is in session, and it is challenging for, I think, both Chase and I to be traveling during the week, understanding that we need to be here to support if the General Assembly needs us. But I think when we're thinking about our July meeting and our October meeting, those are far enough in advance that we can start thinking through, can we do that, and do we have the budget? What are the budget implications for that as well?
Thank you, Tess, and thank you, commissioners. The next 3 items on our agenda today will be the budget updates from Melanie Harrell. Melanie will present the fiscal year 2022 budget closeout, provide the fiscal year 23 budget to actuals, and will present the fiscal year 24 budget request. Melanie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Hansen and committee. For the FY22 closeout, it's closeout with an asterisk. The state has not officially closed yet, but we have updated the budget to actuals for everything that we think is material. We are not expecting any additional sort of material expenditures to be recorded on our books, but you will see that we are waiting on kind of the final close on our revenue. So some of our revenue is still waiting to be reflected on our books. The other thing that I want to highlight is that we have not yet received the final BEP true-up from the TDOE. That typically happens around this time. District final expenditure reports are due October 1st, so we are hoping that we will get that soon. But we will not be able to fully close out FY22 until we receive that final true-up, can reconcile any payments with the districts, and make sure those payments are made to our schools. I do also want to flag that as a part of that process, what this functionally means for our revenue is that we are never able to recognize any authorizer fee revenue off of that final true-up. So last year, I believe it was about $900,000 in additional revenue. And so that money goes back to the schools because the state is already sort of past the ability to recognize new revenue. We don't get to recognize any revenue off of that final BEP payment. So that is something I just wanted to bring to the attention of the committee. We budget conservatively for that reason. It's part of the ever fun game of trying to predict authorizer fee revenue. But that is that final true-up. We don't recognize any authorizer fee revenue. It's all fully passed to the schools. I did want to highlight that we are projecting reverting approximately 42% of our state funds after our gear offset. As a reminder, that was some funding that we received from the TDOE to kind of help our operations as part of the ASD transition bill. And so we're keeping a close eye on that reversion, knowing that there is a very clear expectation that's been set by the General Assembly that we are moving off of any dependence on state funds, and you'll see that as a common theme as we're talking through some of these updates. So in terms of FY23, we have included our current budget to actuals for the first quarter of FY23. We've reflected an updated enrollment projection. This is based on our internal projections. We have not yet received kind of our initial ADM official projections from the department, but we are anticipating those this week. We have seen some of our schools have a lower enrollment than anticipated, and that has impacted our BEP and authorizer fee projections. We have also left our initial SRM grant allocation estimates the same. I think most of you were here for the previous committee meeting, but we have not yet received final allocations from the department, and so we don't yet know the kind of total amount for those, but again, we're hoping to get those soon, and we'll be able to update the committee in January. One thing that I think we want to highlight as well is that we do not recognize any administrative fees from any of our grants. So you'll see we had kind of initially earmarked potentially the need for some admin funding from ESSER. We're not anticipating taking that. We also do not take any what are called consolidated administrative expenses off of our federal grant pass-through. So some authorizers, that can amount to upwards of $750,000 sort of off the top of federal grant pass-through. That is not something that we hold at the district level, and we pass through all of that funding to our schools. So the other thing that I want to talk about is, since I just mentioned our reversion amount for last year, we understand some questions that have arisen about what does it mean for us to have a surplus. We don't get to carry forward any of that money. This is not money that we get to keep year over year. This is money that reverts back to the general fund at the end of the year, or if there's unspent authorizer fees, reverts back to our schools. So again, we know internally that there's a very clear expectation that has been set by the General Assembly that we are using our state funds to stabilize our revenue, not to sort of be dependent on for as long as possible. So internally, we have a sort of minimal reversion expectation of $650,000. That is not including the gear offset, but this is something that we keep an eye on internally to make sure that we are really respecting the wishes of the General Assembly and the charge that they have given us to be very judicious in how we are accessing our state funds. And so this is something that we keep an eye on in terms of our authorizer fee, keeping an eye on making sure that we are reverting as much of our state funding as possible, but also making sure that we are advocating for that to be a stabilizing source for our agency, given, as we know, the wide variation that we see with the authorizer fee and how the true-up process runs. So just wanted to highlight that, and this is something that as I talk about FY24 and we get ready for our budget hearings, we know will be a continued topic of discussion as well. So on that, for FY24, in your materials, you'll see the preliminary FY24 budget that was approved by the committee last meeting. We were hoping to be able to provide an update to that, especially on our revenue, but we have not yet received any TISA revenue expectations from the department, and we are looking to get more clarity on our enrollment projections to see if that's something that we could start to get a better estimate on internally. But we do not have that estimate from the TDOE at this time. So as an additional reminder, our gear funds expire at the beginning of FY24, so we will not have kind of that grant source that year as well, and we won't be able to rely on that as an offset for any of our state funding in the hopes of sort of continuing to grow that reversion amount. We did also recently submit our FY24 budget request to Finance and Administration. We did request an additional 3 coordinator positions to support our growing portfolio. As Tess referenced, we know we have capacity needs on our LEA operations, our fiscal and grant management side, as well as we fielded 13 appeals, and I think we all know that we may have some growing authorizing team needs as well. And so we do not believe that that will require any additional state funding at this time, and our hope is that we will be able to work with the Department of Finance and Administration and with the Governor's Office to see if these positions can support our district functions and our authorizing functions. So again, we want to recognize that the General Assembly's expectations that we're supporting our agency functions independent of state funding has been made very clear. We also, as I mentioned, have our budget hearing with the Department of Finance and Administration on November 2nd. We anticipate that this will be a significant topic of discussion in terms of how we are monitoring and utilizing our resources and allocating those effectively. So with that, I know that was a lot of information. It's a lot of numbers. I'm happy to field any questions from the committee at this time.
If Chase were here, I would ask him to make official a term in the minutes that we could kind of refer back to. And I still don't understand why we can't get clarity on 2024's budget when we haven't closed out 2022, but we'll talk about that another day. Are there questions, Commissioner Smith?
So just going to, because I know that you're going to get asked that question, but looking at it, we had a net surplus of 566 in FY22. We're at 689 projected in 23, going up to looks like 916. So kind of timeline it out. I mean, I know you've probably done some forecasting. When do you think we'll hit that tipping point of no longer needing the state funds to be sustainable?
So I think that that's a great question. Currently, we're anticipating that the authorizer fee can cover about 70% of our expenses for this year. And then I think next year there is still, quite frankly, a big question mark without those TISA projections. Not having a kind of flat per pupil amount means that we know that student characteristics and any demographic changes across our schools become very, very important to projecting our revenue. And so, we're shooting for about 70%. I would say that is kind of what we communicated during our sunset hearing. That's what our latest numbers that we're providing to FNA are showing that. But I think we also know that the state revenue is very important right now for us to be able to stabilize our operations, given that, a primary focus for us is also to make sure that, God forbid, if we ever needed to close a school, there's no sort of massive implications for our revenue, that we can make all of our authorizing decisions very independently of any considerations about our budget. And so we do consider it a very important stopgap, but it is something that we know that we're trying to show clear progress towards reverting as much of that funding as possible every year.
And the reason I asked that question is I want to rewind back a couple of weeks ago, and then, we've obviously got a lot of appeals we're going to be hearing. And I want everyone to understand the easy route for us would be just to approve as many of those schools as possible, because that's more authorizer fee. But that's not what we were tasked with. We're looking at each individual school. Is this best for students, best for the district, and what's going to be best overall to help raise students up? So while we're being judicious with, looking at that funding, again, for the commission, the easy thing for us would be just put as many schools so we're getting the authorizer fee to get off that, get off the state recurring funding. But that's not what we're doing. So I just want everyone to understand all of the weights and balances of what's going into this discussion, especially as FNA looks at it, as the General Assembly. When you hear members say they don't want to see certain schools open in certain places, well, that affects our ability to have authorizer fees. So, there's just got to be some understanding with the General Assembly that you can give and you can take away, but you can't do both and expect a product. So, I'm trying to be very careful how I say it, but, I like the approach that we've taken, which is we have separated, is this best for students? We don't look at the financial implication. We could care less for us about the financial implication. Is this best for students? But we still have a responsibility. Whatever decision we as a body make, we have a decision, and you all are doing a fantastic job of trying to get us stable so that we are no longer recurring on these funds. But I just want to make sure that's clear for the members of the General Assembly that might be watching or could watch this in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that comment, Commissioner Smith. And I think that's something that I know Tess and I and the whole team talk about a lot, is how are we most strategically deploying our resources? And again, we can't say this enough, keeping a very close eye on enrollment, true up BEP projections, and now TISA revenue projections, knowing how important those will be going forward.
I also just wanted to compliment Melanie and the staff for operating very conservatively and flexibly in an environment where we really don't know what the next year's number of schools it wants to apply and who's going to get through. So I appreciate you always being very conservative with state dollars. Any other questions for Melanie and team?
One last question, just if we're done with all the serious stuff for just a second, so looking at our copier costs, do we pay like in color versus black and white? Because if so, I'd recommend we start using orange and white rather than anything red or blue on these forms.
I'd like to unrecognize Commissioner Smith.
I feel obliged in this with Go Frogs, so.
Thank you, Melanie, for the additional information. I know we'll be keeping a close eye on this. Did you have anything? Thank you all for the attendance and participation in this meeting of the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. At this time, I would like to ask if there are any final comments not relating to orange or white. If there are no comments, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. The next meeting of the Business Operations Committee meeting is scheduled for January 26, 2023. I look forward to seeing you all at the full commission meeting this afternoon. We stand adjourned.
And Chase, how long do we need before? Because we're going to just continue rolling on. So you let us know when we're ready.
You want to start at 11:50?
Sure.
All right.
Last committee is at 11:50.